We are going to get started in just a second. I think we're good to go. Let me find the record button. Oop.
Gotcha.
Okay, thank you so much. Hello and welcome to the Earth Day Everyday webinar series. This spring series is entitled Some Good News, Environmental Success Stories in New Jersey. These webinars are a partnership between the Earth Day Everyday team and program and the Marine Extension Program seminar series. And some of the teammates for the program are on this evening giving a helping hand. These webinars have been going on for about 5 years. We started them right before the pandemic in 2020 and are really geared towards providing both information for the public, but also giving you guys some practices you can incorporate into your everyday lives on different topics. Today's topic is on dam removal and river restoration. But just some housekeeping before we get started with the webinar. We will be taking questions at the end of the presentation this evening. The way you get a question to us is you click on the chat button, which is the 2 word balloons at the bottom of your screen or device. Click on that. Please make sure to direct the questions to myself. My name is Steve Yurjo. I'm one of the project team members that's bringing the webinars. So please direct it to myself, and we will go through them at the end as best as we can within the time allowed. If you can't find, that everyone will be muted on entry into the webinar, and I ask that people keep their cameras off as well, just to kind of make things go smoothly. But if you do have any questions, please feel free during the entire course of the evening to put it into the chat for us. This program, we will at the end ask you guys to fill out an evaluation and a survey. And this survey, by having you guys fill it out, makes you part of a research study in the eyes of Rutgers University. Please take a moment at the beginning of the survey to fill out the consent. We need your consent to be able to move forward with it. I just want to remind folks that the consent is voluntary. It's also an anonymous survey and it is confidential. The results are kept with just the members of the project team and they are not shared. Your feedback is valuable, so please really do some consideration on the consent. This slide just kind of goes into a little bit of detail on the study and what it entails. And as a reminder, we are recording this evening's webinar, and we will make it available for folks to see afterwards as well, so you can review this slide again if you need to think about the consent, but we do want you guys to do that consideration and provide your feedback if possible. And finally, for myself, Rutgers Cooperative Extension provides these webinars. These webinars, they're accessible for all people. But if you feel that these programs that we provide, or especially this webinar series, are inaccessible to you, please feel free to voice your concerns at the phone number provided, which is 848-932-3584. If you feel there's something better we could do, etc., please let them know. But we do try to make these as accessible for all, even for, even if it is just a webinar, we do try to provide that accessibility for everybody. And finally, while I do this last little bit, Carl, I will stop sharing. And if you wish to start sharing your slides, I will go into the introduction in a second. But just to let you guys know, we do provide these webinars for free for folks. But if you would like to make a donation for the program, I will put in the chat a link that you can go to. This will help support our extension work with volunteers, including internships for them, scholarships, and supplies. But I will put that information in the chat if you could do that as well. So this evening, we have our talk on dam removal and river restoration. The person talking this evening is Carl Alderson. And Carl is a restoration ecologist at the Office of Habitat Conservation at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's Howard Marine Science Lab at Sandy Hook. He is a habitat restoration specialist, and he provides technical expertise to polluter cases where damages are sought for injuries to the natural resources. And these injuries can include such things as oil spills, releases of heavy metals, organic solvents, PCBs, and dioxin into the environment. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's Office of Habitat Conservation provides grants for fish passage shellfish and wetland restoration, and is engaged in a national effort to improve the overall health of coastal habitats and river systems. Since joining NOAA in 2002, Carl has led a team of New York City scientists in a decade-long effort to combat wetland injuries due to such things, like I mentioned before, as oil spills in the New York-New Jersey Harbor estuary. Carl is a graduate of the Rutgers School of Environmental and Biological Sciences. Yay, we like to hear that. And is a licensed landscape architect and an avid kayaker. So Carl, thank you so much for being here tonight and presenting your presentation on dam removal and river restoration. So I will turn it over to you, sir.
Thank you, Steve. And thanks, Doug. And thanks, everyone. Well, welcome to the Sandy Hook J.J. Howard National Marine Lab, where I am standing and talking with you today. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration Northeast Fisheries Science Center is located here out at Sandy Hook at the former Fort Hancock Army Base, which operated until 1973, and today hosts the Mast Marine Academy for high school students in Monmouth County, the NOAA Lab, the U.S. Coast Guard, and the National Park Service, which operates the park. So we're all here, and on a peninsula far removed from the Raritan River by about 30 some miles to New Brunswick. But I will say that my favorite river in all of the 4 mid-Atlantic states that I cover on polluter cases, that includes Pennsylvania, Delaware, New York, and New Jersey, my hometown river is on the banks of the Raritan, and where I went to school. And it's fascinating how it just keeps pulling me back. So I'd like to talk about the Raritan River today and tell you about the work we have been doing to improve fish passage. And first, a shout out to those 2 guys next to me in that lower right photo. Dave Bean, the former chief of the Office of Natural Resource Restoration at New Jersey DEP, and project manager John Jengo of Stantec, who, along with myself, came up with this idea back in 2008. People had been talking about possibly doing something to heal the Raritan River for many years, and it was beyond time to start to get serious about it. And the 3 of us concocted the idea of a fish passage initiative, which had 3 goals. And those goals were to open the Raritan River up as much as possible to anadromous fish species, catadromous fish species. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, anadromous species are migratory from the ocean that spawn upriver. That would include shad and blueback herring and alewife, and also other species that are semi-migratory, such as striped bass and white perch, and catadromous species such as the American eel, which does the reverse, where it spawns out in the open ocean but lives its entire adult life cycle upriver. So we concocted that idea with the idea of the opening of the river. We recognized that the Delaware River was the East Coast's major and really only major river to be undammed and therefore fully passable to these species. And we saw that we would like to have New Jersey's longest and largest watershed, interior watershed, with the Raritan River and its tributaries, the South Branch, the North Branch, and the Millstone, to also reflect that great and amazing historic flow that it once had, undammed, unchecked, much like the Delaware. We had some additional goals, which were have this initiative accepted by our agencies. And also we had hoped that we would gain some recognition and that this effort would be a pilot for a statewide effort. And I have to say that a lot of those things have come true. We have a statewide effort led by TNC. For a long time, we had a sounding board with Rutgers, the Sustainable Raritan Initiative, hosted by Judy Shaw at Rutgers University at the Blaustein School. And we got something that we didn't expect, which was a letter of congratulations from the governor of New Jersey, sort of a little extra pat on the back that we didn't see forthcoming. So this has been going on since 2008 in earnest. And there are our species. The American shad, about a 21-inch long fish, the kind of fish you would draw when you were a kid. It's like the fish of all fish. If I was drawing a picture of a bird when I was 5, it would look like 2 arcs, right? And that's what an osprey looks like. And if I drew a little fish just real quick with one pencil line, probably looked just like a shad. So same for alewife and blueback, which are smaller fish. They together are collectively known as river herring. What do? Well, they live their adult life in the Atlantic Ocean. They will stay out in the Atlantic Ocean in southern waters through northern waters until the biological imperative to spawn, and then they will swim up their natal waters to where they were spawned, and then we'll repeat the process. Sometime in their 3rd to 4th or 5th year, they'll do this. Now, will they return? That's a great question. They tend to return in large numbers in the Northeast back to the ocean so they can spawn again, very much unlike Pacific salmon, which don't ever do that, or rarely, if ever. I'm not going to say ever, but they tend to return, and they maybe as much as 80% survivorship, where they actually spawn and return in the Northeast, but the numbers are much lower in the southern states from Georgia through North Carolina, where it's believed that higher temperatures in those rivers at the time of spawning may lead to increased respiration rates. And so it's not as efficient, and they lose more body weight in those rivers. So it can be, mortality can be as high as 80%. So it's kind of the flip reverse. Oh, back again. All right. So to continue with those 3 species in mind, plus American eel, and let's not forget sea lamprey. I almost forgot to give them a shout out. Also migratory. Here is the Raritan Millstone watershed, right? So you have the mouth at Perth Amboy, and it travels up to New Brunswick. There's a couple of small tributaries, the South River, the Lawrence Brook before you hit New Brunswick. And then big arc right here before it breaks off into the Millstone confluence with the Raritan main stem, and the main stem continues on until the next big confluence, which is where the North Branch and the South Branch meet. The Raritan from that point on becomes the South Branch going this way and the North Branch this way. But let's not forget the Rockaway Creek and the Lamington/Black River. Depending on where you live, you may call that tributary the Black or the Lamington. And so when you've got this many major tributaries, you become a pretty sizable watershed. In fact, 1,100 square mile river watershed, 3 hydraulic unit code 8 watersheds. That's USGS speak for the various sub-watersheds. So there are many. And you'd probably be surprised to know that there are 70 municipalities and 7 counties in the Raritan watershed, including our beloved Rutgers University and our rival, the Princeton Tigers. So What is this Raritan River Fish Passages Initiative? Once again, it's NOAA, Fish and Wildlife Service, New Jersey DEP, NGOs, and academic institutions coming together to promote and implement fish passage projects. We remove blockages to migratory and non-migratory fish species. So again, shout out to the non-migratory. We are taking dams so far up the south branch of the Raritan that we are no longer in the ocean-going spawning areas. We've gone further up into the headwaters. Something you need to know about shad and river herring, they don't jump. They're not like salmon. They can't get themselves up over a hydraulic lift that may be more than 6 inches. And so by the time you get into the Highlands district, you start to encounter ledges and steep slopes. The gradient changes, and this acts as a barrier to these species. But at that point, you start to get into cold water streams for non-migratory species, such as trout. So trout and other small resident species are blocked as well from running the full length of the river in the cold water stream area. So think above the Kenwat Lockwood Gorge, or think about Ravine Lake up on the North Branch, and what that presents beyond that upstream. That's basically cold water trout habitat. So in taking those dams out, we are improving water quality. In fact, across the board, it's all about water quality. It's about getting a riverine habitat, removing lacustrine-like habitat, being like impoundments that look like lakes, which tend to be eutrophic, right? Nutrient loaded, and tend to have some fish kills. And they also, will have impaired other resources, such as freshwater mussels and other benthic organisms, which are those small critters that live on the bottom. And they also will have impaired resources like insect species like mayfly that you would associate with a free-running river. So I said that shad can't jump, and they aren't going that far upriver. So here's some technical talk from folks at U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and USGS over time, who studied the dart speed, burst speed, if you will, of these various species. So literally in a lab in Massachusetts, there is an experimental lab that puts fish through calisthenics, if you will. It's like a EKG machine for fish. And that machine runs them up can be controlled at different gradients, and seeks to find out at what slope, how in any given slope, represented by this red line, how far can a shad or a river herring travel at its burst speed? So the lower the gradient, the further the shad can travel at its full top speed. And this is important when you consider the speed of a river during spring, when traditionally the waters are flowing faster and higher. So when you are downstream in free-running, low-gradient waters, you can combat faster-moving water. The one thing you really can't do is get over this dam that I've pictured right here by this trapezoidal block. And so there's really no getting over major impediments like, a 3-foot dam, a 5-foot dam, or higher. All right, well, we'll move on from that. So what do we do in some cases? We create ways to get around major dams that have a human purpose that cannot be accomplished by any other means than a dam, such is the case of the Island Farm Weir, which spans Bridgewater Township on the right, and on the bottom left, that's Franklin Township. both in Somerset County. So we are many miles up out of the tidal waters, way beyond New Brunswick and Bound Brook. And we have come to the confluence of the Millstone, where that star is on the location map, the Millstone traveling off to the top left, and the Raritan continuing to the top right. Now, the water supply facility, which is off to the right side of the screen, which you can't see, is responsible for supplying Central Jersey residents to the tune of 2 million customers for domestic water at this location. In the impoundment upstream of the dam are 5 major water intake pipes, which you cannot see. They are submerged. Without the dam there'd be no way for those intake pipes to successfully suck in the water without bringing a load of sediment. So, and nobody needs that. So you raise the water elevation so the pipes can pull from the impoundment. And those all collect at the facility, and they do what they do there at the New Jersey American Water Supply. It's a private company. It supplies most of New Jersey's water, and the dam operates to do so. Now, the thing is, there is a fish ladder there. In 1993, it was determined to build this dam for water supply. There had been smaller versions of it. You can actually see a tiny little bit of a weir that was here. It is now submerged. Further upstream, there is a former weir, but this one was going to be taller, larger, and it was going to be combined with this new facility. So they built a fish ladder, which is this contraption right here. This is called a concrete vertical slot weir. And the only way to explain it is to look at this graphic below me. The entryway isn't right. If you can see my arrow, it looks like the entryway is here, but that's actually an overflow for water just moving straight through. The actual ladder is this little gray, darker gray square right here. So that's what we're looking at in the graphic below. Now, this little patch of white water at the entrance, that's the tailwater. That's called the attraction flow. So the water actually passes through the head up here. There's actually a guy standing right there. It passes through 8 chambers and then passes rapidly through here. It needs to pass rapidly because the fish have to recognize that there is a large amount of flow here so that they don't keep banging their head up against the water that's flowing over the spillway. They'll say, okay, here's a volume of water that is traveling at or better speed than the turbid water coming over the spillway. So we'll go there. So let's go down to the graphic to A1. The water is flowing rapidly out this little red, there's actually no gate there. It's just open. And they come in from the right and they come into the entry chamber. If they're smart, if they're lucky, any combination of that and the biological imperative is strong, they will find a flow through a tiny concrete slot. And they will pass through that 6-inch wide slot into the next chamber. The next chamber is actually 6 inches higher than the entry chamber. So now they've just basically, without really realizing it, jumped into a higher elevation chamber. And on it goes through each chamber bringing them 6 inches higher, 6 inches higher, 6 inches, until they pass into the final chamber right before exiting here at the head race, or the headwater, or the headwater. So tail race at the beginning, headwater at the top. That's the exit. And on they go. What could go wrong? Well, a lot of things. But just to let you know that there's a chamber here for humans. You can climb down inside of that, where that person actually is, that you can barely see in the photo. He climbs down into that viewing chamber. There's a viewing window here. We've set up cameras, both video cameras in the past and digital ones, first VHS tapes, and then in later years, digital cameras that can operate 24 hours, that send images to computers at Rutgers and possibly DEP and others, right? We're looking through this window at kind of shadowy creatures. At night, we can still see them because we use infrared cameras to detect their passage in the evening. So we've gotten pretty fancy over the years. Credit goes to Olaf Jensen of the former Jensen lab at Rutgers University, who conducted the study of passage efficiency for us, for DEP and NOAA, over the course of 10 years. And the findings were that this structure, though it cost $2.5 million in 1995 when it was finalized, it does not work very well. And here are the problems. It has to be maintained constantly. The waters of the Raritan are extremely muddy. They bring a lot of silt and sediment into the chambers. And when that happens, that mud settles down into the chambers and actually interrupts and changes the dimension of the chambers and how much volume of water they're transmitting. So by the time you get down to the entry chamber, you've altered the velocity. So what do you have to do? You have to constantly keep scooping the mud out of these things. That becomes the responsibility of New Jersey American Water, who took on the management of a New Jersey DEP dam through an agreement with the Water Supply Authority, New Jersey NJ Water Authority, NJWA, right? So there's these series of agreements, and they take on the maintenance responsibility at the water company. So if they don't do this, things go wrong. Now, what else can go wrong? Debris accumulates right at the headwater down here at A4. You pile up enough logs and things in front of that chamber, and it stops the flow of water, changes the velocity so that you're reducing the attraction velocity bursting out of the entrance at A1. What else can go wrong? Well, in the entry chamber, there's a grate right here on this wall. It's a louvered grate that directs additional water into the chamber so that we can maximize the attraction flow, which has to be very speedy. That's this larger whitish gray patch here that has the flow coming through here, right? So you send some water from up the Raritan through that and into this louvered grate and into here to maximize your flow. Here's what happens. It's a steel louvered grate, and it vibrates, and it's anchored by some concrete lag screws. And as it vibrates, the lag screws start to loosen, and in a violent flow, the entire louvered grate, about 4 foot wide and 4 foot high, pops off, lays in the chamber, and a rush of water comes into the entry chamber. Now, this water is circling around like a tornado, not what you want for the fish, because you have to get them to A2, but not if you have a crazy vortex going around, because the louver, which directed the water, is no longer doing it. And what happens is, if the fish does get through, oftentimes in the viewing room, and if we pull fish from the ladder exit, they're missing a lot of scales and they can be bloody. So they've gotten beaten up in the first chamber. What do we do, right? What do we do? So this wasn't really working and still isn't really working. I'll get back to that. You need to know that because that is the first downstream semi-barrier to passage. If it's well maintained and it's functioning, it gets these kinds of numbers. This is the 10-year study we did. There's Olaf Jensen, and he's putting a pit tag there along the anal line of this large mature shad, where I get to do the job of holding it, which is kind of fun compared to taking an X-Acto knife to its belly. So this is from a published paper. After all was said and done, these are the authors. Shad were passing 31 to 48% per year, which is not terrible, but their passage should be much higher if the structure was working credibly. I'm going to use that word at all times. River herring, which are much smaller, have a less muscular frame and don't have as great a burst speed as shad do. We're only passing from 0 to 0.9, less than 1%. Okay, that's not good because river herring are extremely important in ways I'll discuss later, as easily as important as shad. So how do we get these numbers? Well, we tagged shad with these pit tags. Think Easy Pass for shad. And we have the transmitter on the fish, and we have the receiver sitting up on the headwater location of the fish ladder and at the tail. So we know what comes in, and we also know what goes out. So river herring going in are being driven back, and they're not making it up to upstream. Well, that's not good when that's your first downstream potential barrier. What to do, what to do. A little history. This is a little known paper written by a German author, Johann David Schopf, in 1783, who observed that numberless schools of shad came high up the millstone. That would be right past the island farm weir that we just looked at. But dams, of which many have been built in recent years, keep back the shad and contribute appreciably to the provisioning of the inhabitants along the banks. In other words, if you're a farmer, you're agrarian, and you count on lumbering, farm crops, and fishing, you're out of luck when the mills started coming in. You're no longer going to be able to fish those waters. In fact, there are anecdotal evidence through history of regular agrarian families gathering together to protest the building of the mills, which then required dams. And so this is the beginning of what we might call the industrial age. So we have so many dams that don't do anything, not like the Island Farm Weir, which has a purpose, but orphaned mill dams, orphaned factory dams, orphaned dams that were supposed to create lake-like impoundments for large-scale neighborhoods or communities that would luxuriate on a large lake-like environment of the river. Never happened. Other dams that may have served as a water supply that no longer do. There are many ways a dam becomes obsolete, and in some cases orphaned by the owners, but in most cases still attributable to some owner. And so recognizing that these species were greatly diminishing, all of them across the board, this became a concern of my agency, responsible for these species. They are NOAA Trust Resources. And my colleagues developed a river herring habitat conservation plan a couple of years ago to try to further the recognition for this, what we might even consider a bit of an ecological disaster. Imagine 8,000 dams in New Jersey and possibly as many as 20,000 in New York State and other states pretty much, following along that in those kinds of numbers. So that's doing a lot of damage because it's like leaving factory equipment or leaving an old mill building behind and falling down in disrepair. You would never do that. You would clean those sites up on land, but we don't think of dams as just abandoned factory infrastructure that should be removed when the operation no longer exists. So what we have is loss of spawning and rearing habitat. We have unhealthy waters. We have improving waters due to the Clean Water Act. And we have depletion by fisheries. So, oops, we went too far. What do I mean by depletion of fisheries? More and more today, small bait fish or small prey fish are consumed by the American public. And that has led to techniques that we might call factory fishing. Large vessels coming up the coast to New Jersey and other states, scooping up primarily bunker, right? The fish known as bunker or menhaden, little 8-inch sized adult fish, schooling up and moving on the migration into places like Raritan Bay and also offshore of the on the coast during the summer season. We use them largely for bait in recreational fishing. They are used as bait throughout industries like recreational fishing for stripers, striped bass in the spring, but also not only bait, but they go into cat food in a surprisingly large number. And omega-3 fatty acid oil used for healthful purposes is largely made of the oil of the menhaden. So, okay, that's a different fish, right? But who schools with other small prey species? River herring do. River herring will come up the coast, sometimes in large schools with menhaden. They'll be preyed upon by marine mammals. They'll be preyed upon by piscivorous birds like gannet. And they'll be preyed upon ultimately by a large corral created by the factory fishing vessels, massive nets that haul in extraordinary numbers. They're processed on the boat, canned on the boat, put it on in boxes and pallets on the boat. And when they get to the location, Norfolk, Virginia, they're ready for the markets. Some of it is frozen for bait. Okay, so problem there is they're not allowed to take the bycatch. The bycatch is all the other species, including river herring and Atlantic herring. So out they go through a portal on the ship back into the ocean. But oftentimes that water pushing the bycatch out to the ocean runs pink because they are bloodied and damaged. So we don't actually have a complete awareness of what the mortality is to the bycatch. So we're basically killing fish that are not allowable by sending them back out in the ocean. We're not even getting their food benefit. So that's a problem. So I've covered the fact that we have depletion by fisheries, we had loss of habitat due to dams, and the waters of the United States in the 1970s were so incredibly contaminated, polluted, whatever you want to call it, that it has taken many decades, as much as 5 decades, to get to the point where we are, where these waters are much healthier. Dissolved oxygen, for example, much healthier than they were in those days. Why? Why recover them aside from getting those fish back and, and protecting and advancing and restoring those key species? What else can we improve by reintroducing these keystone species to our our waters, our rivers of the United States, from Florida to Maine and up into Canada. These fish are everywhere. And then suddenly not in the last 200 years. So I would propose to you that the beneficiaries are many, including freshwater mussels. Why? It's not that mussels eat fish. They certainly don't. These are just 3 inches across, the triangle floater and the brook floater, state endangered and threatened species. But what happens is that shad and river herring bring nutrient into the upper waters. So I said that a certain number of fish die in the effort of spawning. That returns nutrients back into the stream. Those nutrients aid other key species, including mussels. So we're putting more nutrient in a large pulse in the spring back into the upper waters. And it is supplying food resources for benthic organisms, macroinvertebrates like mussels, and also larval benthic organisms, including anything that might look like a worm in a larval stage and anything that might look like a fly in an adult stage. We do have some concerns, though. This very large mussel has invaded small area in New Jersey. It's called the silty pond mussel or the Chinese pond mussel. It's invasive, and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service are on the case through monies collected through damage settlements, which is largely how we're funding these dam removals. They too are being funded by this to determine the presence or absence of the key species of mussels, and also whether or not we have presence of these invasives. Another invasive might be zebra mussel, and so far so good. As far as the Raritan goes, the 2024 study showed that we did not have environmental DNA present in the Raritan waters. So that's good. Okay, why else? I mentioned food for marine mammals. Did you know that in addition to bunker, humpback whales are here primarily because we've got an enormous amount of menhaden, bunker, right? But also we have herring, we have river herring, we have Atlantic herring, we have anchovies. Humpback whales are here. If we don't have the diversity of species, if we don't have the shad and river herring, we have a reduced abundance, and thus, we have reduced richness. We have reduced diversity of species for them to eat. What if the population of bunker were to crash tremendously in any given year? What would happen to these key whale species that are fish eating? And here's a nice list, not a complete list, but a list of marine mammals you will recognize that do feed on small prey species like shad and river herring. So we can speculate why humpbacks are prevalent in the New York Bight in recent years. Could be the abundance variety of food resources. It could be cleaner, more productive waters owing to the Federal Clean Water Act and New Jersey rules as well. Rules and regulations on recreational commercial fishing, and changing climate condition due to warming. All right, I have 21 slides total, and I'm getting towards the end. This is what we've achieved. Here's the map of the watershed. Red, we took it out or are about to take it out. Light blue, we're getting to it. Green, the Island Farm Weir, the only green dot right near the star. We're hoping to create a rock ladder, which is an in-river fish passage methodology to replace the existing vertical concrete slot weir. and the yellow are the ones that are already breached and passable. So you can see the violet colored area is what we believe is the historic range of these migratory ocean-going fish, not counting eel, which can get up into the entire watershed. And then the beige or yellowy looking areas, those are areas that we don't expect or are not in a part of the historic run of these key ocean-going species. Those would be considered the freshwater, cold water stream areas for the most part. And so you can see that for a time there, we, like number 10 and number 9 were not under consideration. But now number 10 and number 9, number 9 and number 10 are under feasibility studies. The engineering work is at 60 to 90% complete for those 2 dams, and we are taking those dams out. So those actually became light blue phase 2 removals. And so that's 11 dams and 6 removed in total so far. What does that amount to? 15 stream miles so far, 6 dams. But with 9 other total dams, including those original 6 for a total of 15, we will achieve 92.36 stream miles, open, accessible stream miles in the Raritan. And in addition, those secondary tributaries like the Royce Brook and the Oceanic Creek and others contribute an additional 30 miles. So at some point, opening the Raritan River could get us as much as something in the 125-mile range of open, accessible waters for our, not only for our ocean-going anadromous and catadromous species, but also for our resident species. What else can we do besides opening dams? Well, we figured out, and we have targeted these locations. We've gone to old agricultural fields on the banks of our 3 major rivers, and we are replanting them with trees because trees provide shade, trees provide cover, trees provide fall downs in the river ultimately, and fall downs are habitat. So here's from last week. This is one of something like 6 sites that we have so far that have been replanted with tree species. You can see the tree guards over there behind to the left of the volunteers. This is the Melix Bridge location on the South Branch. We have in mind to finish to plant 10,000 trees through the Raritan Headwaters Association. The 3 folks on the right are the 4 folks on the right are staff members from our partners at Raritan Headwaters Association. And they have been diligently planting to get to this 10,000 tree goal in open meadows representing former ag fields. And so the areas are often populated by invasive grass species, sometimes native grass species. And the idea is to get canopy going there, which cools the temperatures of the river and provides structure. Here, Duke Farms, this is from 2 weeks ago. There's my colleague Peter Avila from New Jersey DEP. And you are looking at an active planting, which will result in 112 acres of forest in the Duke Farms lower floodplain area, which was inhabited by large stretches of Artemisia vulgaris, which is mugwort. You might be familiar with trying to rip it out of your own homes and gardens, and also reed canary grass, which creates monocultures and prohibits other forbs and other beneficial herbaceous plant material from getting a hold. So, reduction of things that are beneficial like milkweed to pollinators. You don't get that when you've got a monoculture of 2 or 3 species. Here, we've wiped out those species. We've leveled the playing field for our tree species and shrubs to repopulate this. When we're finished, the 112 acres in 5 years, we will have put in 49,000 to 50,000 trees and shrubs, all of it protected by a 2-mile perimeter fence around the entirety, which is 8 foot high and deer proof, so long as the Raritan River doesn't flood and knock it over. But we've bolstered that each one of the fence posts is bolstered in a way that would prevent it from falling. So hopefully we do succeed. And we just had a groundbreaking ceremony a couple weeks ago on this project, and the teams have already planted 19,000 in one of the fields. In summary, this initiative, supported by federal, state, municipal, NGO, and academic partners, have in fact completed 6 passage projects in the watershed, calling for 9 additional projects within the first 2 decades. We are now in year 16, and we are moving steadily towards that goal. When completed, over 100 river miles will be made accessible to these important diadromous meaning catadromous and anadromous and resident species. And here's a little celebration. That's an aluminum goldfish, if you would, called the happy fish. And he comes to us from our partners in Europe, who were inspired by our efforts in the United States, created their own programs for European rivers and called their effort World Fish Migration Day. And in return, they inspire us, and they mailed us this large 35-pound or so steel-tubed fish. And we took many, many photos of all our sites with this fish in various positions, and then sent them back to our colleagues there in Europe, so that the inspiration just keeps going back and forth. We also created a logo. We call him Huck Finn. If you caught on before, the hydraulic unit code created by USGS is Huck code. So in the name of dad humor, we called our mascot Huck Finn, who travels these rivers looking for adventure. And that's our unofficial logo. So thanks to all these partners for their generous support over the years for this effort. And we hope that our effort here on the Raritan is an inspiration to everyone across the Mid-Atlantic. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carl. It's a good thing I was muted, because I literally laughed out loud when I realized his name was Huck Finn. So that's a great dad joke. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. It's in keeping with all dad jokes. It's got to be very punny.
Just
right,
to let
so
everybody,
I'm going to stop sharing.
Okay. Just to let everybody know, I did launch the poll and the survey. If you could fill that out, that would be fantastic. Thank you for your feedback on that. Carl, we do have a few questions, if you're willing to field some of those from folks.
Yes, indeed.
Okay.
I'm ready.
Okay. First of all, one of the first questions we got was someone was concerned with how we can identify local dams that might need removal, or ones that might be ideal for removal. Specifically, they live in Piscataway and are concerned about the Lake Nelson Dam. And they were looking into what kind of analysis is done to figure out if it's a candidate to be removed.
Okay. I am not remembering if that's on the Bound Brook, the Green Brook. Is it on, let's see, Piscataway?
They mentioned it was Ambrose Creek.
Ambrose Creek. Thank you. That's the southernmost one that flows sort of east-west. Okay. Yeah, I don't always know the names of these dams, and there are many. Okay. Reason, we haven't addressed that. So I did mention that we seek compensation from polluters, and I didn't give a lot of attention to that, but let me address that right now. So there isn't exactly ready funding for dam removals in New Jersey. But what there are a lot of federally recognized national priority list dams, pollution sites, contaminant sites across New Jersey. We have the highest density of NPL sites, national priority list sites, which you might recognize as the designation that comes with Superfund law, which was enacted in 1980 at the end of the Carter administration. There isn't a large fund anymore, but there are a lot of contaminated sites. So the fund is diminished, but we do work with polluters to resolve their liabilities. So think about this. We know that the EPA, under this law, cleans up waste sites. They perform cleanup actions. So that's removing contamination from rivers and land, groundwater, streams, coastal embayments, estuaries, and putting it somewhere where it's confined, or capping in place. And capping in place often means that we're going to use the surface again for development. So think big box warehouses and things like that. But aside from the cleanup part, there's this lesser known part called natural resource damage assessment and restoration, commonly known as NERDAR, amongst those who practice it, which is me and my colleagues, who go to those same polluters, and we seek damages for the sustained long-term injury caused by the presence of those materials, not just the presence, but the concentration and the location and the time period, and what is known from the literature or original studies, what is known of that to cause injury to our trust resources. So for Fish and Wildlife Service, that can be everything, land-based organisms. That can be insects, birds, mammals, reptiles, amphibians. For NOAA, that's largely marine organisms. And we look at what those levels of concentration are able to do to injure, either create mortality or, well, let's call them lethal and sublethal effects in our trust resources. That can be fecundity issues. That's fertility issues. So, we study reduction of successful spawning, largely in laboratories, in order to determine whether or not the contaminants are having an effect on their reproduction. So those are the kind of things we look at. And then when we take that information, we determine what the injury is over time and space through a formula, and then we try to dock that with the appropriate amount of habitat restoration to produce an equivalent amount of resources that were injured. So we're trying to really get at how many fish, how many birds, how many insects, how many marine mammals. We're trying to get at that, and then couple that with the appropriate response in creating new clean habitats. Not an easy thing to do. We negotiate with the polluters. We hardly ever litigate with them. That's very rare. We negotiate to a settlement. We either get a cash compensation or the polluter performs a habitat restoration on their own with our oversight, such as the Duke Farms project. That's the polluter performing the project with our federal and state oversight. That happens, and we get something beneficial. Okay, So why not Ambrose, right?
Yes.
Okay. Why not? It's connected to the Bound Brook. And one of the polluter sites is in South Plainfield. And the Bound Brook is currently under a cleanup order by the EPA. The facility called the Cornell Dubilier Electronics Factory disposed of their PCB contamination in drums, dug a big hole on the site and buried them. Classic scenario, like the classic New Jersey scenario. Let's hide the waste on site. The drums rusted, the materials poured into the Bound Brook, and the entire length of the Bound Brook became contaminated and is still subject to cleanup. Because Ambrose is connected to that system, we are not taking any dams out in those contaminated waterways until the EPA completes their cleanup mission in the lower 8 miles of the Bound Brook and its associated tributaries are remedied. That's the word we use, remedied.
Yeah.
So that's the answer. It's a long-winded answer, but I think it deserves an explanation.
Well, as you mentioned, there's a lot that goes into determining whether or not a dam should be removed. So there's a lot of information behind that.
Yes, and contamination is an issue.
Mm-hmm.
It just so happens that the Raritan River is so flashy and its river bottom is generally large cobbles, boulders, and large gravels, that the material from waste sites, from factory sites, has moved so swiftly through those waters. It's not being held in impoundments behind the lower main stem dam. So when we took those dams out, it was years ago that the contamination rushed out into Raritan Bay. If you want to find the American cyanamide contamination from Bridgewater, go look out in Raritan Bay in the Atlantic Ocean. At this point, that has been driven out of those locales. So in those cases, the river, the background levels aren't really any different upstream from downstream, and we can do those removals. But when the contamination persists, especially in impoundments that are murky and muddy, then we've got to dig those materials out and dispose of those contaminants properly. So that will happen and is going to happen on some of those headwaters projects.
Great.
That I got that one, covered that one.
One of the other questions from a couple of people had to do with the Island Farm fish ladder.
Yes.
You mentioned that there were certain percentages of the fish that were passing through, but people were concerned as to what that's a percentage of. Like you mentioned 31 or 48% of the shad or the herring getting through, but what was that a percentage of?
That's a percentage of all the fish that were tagged. So slice the abdomen, we put the transmitter into the abdomen, we close up the wound. If the fish is detected at the lower entry chamber, that's good news, but that doesn't mean that it passed. So then we have to detect it at the easy pass at the head. If we know the number of fish, we tag, and each fish is then numbered according to their tag. And that radio transmits to the ladder. So if the fish is not going through, then that's a miss. If the fish goes all the way through, that's a hit. And it just so happens that we tagged enough fish to really get some reasonable numbers over 10 years. It doesn't include all the fish that we detected through the viewing window on the digital cameras, because that's only detecting the fish that are passing, not the fish that attempted to pass.
Just a couple more questions. One that was interesting was that someone was curious as to whether or not the dams that you're talking about have anything to do with flood mitigation, and what impact does that have on their function to control flooding? Does it make it worse or make it better by having these dams removed?
None of the dams that we have removed or will remove are flood control dams. They were never created for that purpose. And in fact, they don't contribute to that purpose. Run-of-the-river dams don't have large impoundments behind them. And so the water, imagine the volume of water that's coming downstream is, and whatever that cubic feet per second amount is, that's a volume calculation. Whatever's coming downstream towards that dam is the same amount going over that dam. So there's never a moment where there's water is being held upstream. That's the best way to describe that. Same amount coming to the dam as going over the dam. And that's true in whatever flood condition exists. The dam's not contributing. However, there is one thing that a dam can be doing, and some of them are doing. They're causing some flooding in a micro location around the dam. So you have a 5-foot high dam, and when the water's, going 2, 3, 4 feet over the top of that dam, that's the 5 feet of the dam height plus a couple of feet above it. So already you're kind of like in a pickle there, because your elevation at the dam face is higher than the rest of the waterway. So that only causes flooding in a small area adjacent to the dam. It doesn't really affect further upstream as much as it will cause flooding in and around either side of the dam. And if there are neighborhoods there, they can be recipients. So when we take out, say, a Coles Mill Dam in Califon, if we are successful in doing so, we will actually be reducing flooding in an area a couple of acres, and thus benefit, maybe 5 to 10 homes.
I just have 2 more questions for you, and then we'll wrap things up.
Sure.
Someone wanted to know, in terms of the fish ladders, they said they have one near them on a nearby property. How do they know if it is working or being maintained?
Oh, that's a great question. Often they are not well maintained. They might be maintained occasionally. It depends. I don't know where that might be. I could speculate, but fish ladders aren't maintained very well. That's one of their problems. And when they're not maintained, they do not work well. Some of those things I mentioned, like debris catching at the head, a poorly maintained fish ladder can be completely useless if materials are stacked up at the head, reducing the waters going down the ladder. So, yeah, not so good. Now, the ones that are maintained, some of them do a very good job with the smaller species. Aluminum steep pass fish ladders, if that's the type you have, that's the most common type, tend to be good for passing the smaller fish, river herring, and not so much for shad. So if you're on a small brook or small tributary and you see one of them, it's largely intended for, the fish that are, 8 inches, not the 21-inch shad.
Thank you. And finally, you mentioned the 8,000 dams in New Jersey. There were a couple of people who are curious as to of those 8,000, how many or what percentage would be considered obsolete versus useful?
I don't know. Nobody keeps those numbers. The folks responsible for that information are the Dam Safety Division in New Jersey DEP. They do a fine job of reaching out to dam owners when there are safety violations, when there are potential hazards by the failing of the dam. They do regular inspections of dams that are classified as over 5 feet in height. Dams that are smaller do not get inspections. So if you've got a 4 foot, 3 foot, and that's measured at the, not at the spillway, but at the wing walls. So your spillway could be 3 feet high, but if your wing walls are 5 feet high, you're getting inspected. And then they send out violation notices to those dams that are considered a high hazard. Those would be ones that if they failed would create havoc downstream. And then, they assess whether or not they find cracks, such like that, to determine if they're in danger of failing. And if you own one of those, you can get notices regularly from the dam safety unit. But what they don't tell you is how many actually have reliable owners versus how many have been abandoned and have no ownership credentials. And they don't tell you how many of those are actually in use and doing something versus really doing nothing. So it would be great to have that. We don't have that.
Well, thank you very much, Carl, for this very informative and obviously necessary talk, so we can learn more about it. So thank you for doing this, and I really appreciate it, and having the time to educate us all on this very important topic. So thank you.
Thanks, Steve. It was a pleasure. Thank you for having me tonight.
No problem. If you are interested in our webinar series, our final one will be happening next Monday, May 19th. It'll be on shellfish and marine habitat restoration with Dr. Christine Thompson from Stockton University and Captain Al Modeski from the American Littoral Society. So if you'd like to join us, please come back then. And thank you again, Carl. And thank you everyone for being here tonight. I appreciate your time and attention. Have a great night and a good week.
Bye.